Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to come out politics. So the issue of Labour supporting AV for the next election came up in my stream on Saturday evening. Now, I wouldn't get too excited for electoral reform because I can find no serious source of the rumour as such. I said in the stream that even if Labour were discussing it seriously, those discussions would surely be so tightly locked down that we would not be hearing of anything just yet. But it is worth pointing out there are advantages to Labour in considering this. I've said myself for many years, I support electoral reform. In fact, frankly, it's the top issue for me because a lot of other issues would be made a lot easier if we had a representative electoral system. Now, I personally would prefer a system of proportional representation regional lists with constituency top-ups chosen by transferable voting. However, I also understand that it would be a much more involved process than transitioning to AV, a riskier pitch to the public. So in this video, I'd like to explain what the advantages of AV specifically are, which is supported by the Electoral Reform Society, especially if you had to push the process from a standing start before the next election. Why it might be in Labour's favour, even though they are currently in power, and so why, although I can find no evidence for this rumour being true, it is feasible. So let's begin with the advantages of an AV system. But first, because that could cover a myriad of forms, let me just break down how it would work. The way this would work is that instead of putting a mark in the box next to your preferred candidate on the ballot paper, you would put numbers in several. A number 1 by your preferred candidate, a number 2 in your second choice, and a number 3 in your third. I would definitely say there should be 3 choices, not 2. So if PR would not be on the table, what are the advantages to this system? Well, something the Lib Dems unsuccessfully attempted to wangle over a decade, remember. Let's look at the advantages to the public first, then politicians. Right now, the public are losing trust in our political system. In fact, recent polling from across a lot of Western countries, including the UK, shows the majority of people, most pronounced amongst the young, have lost faith with the democratic systems of their country. A big part of this is likely that many electoral systems do not produce a result that is broadly satisfactory to the general population, and most pronounced amongst the young because the young feel less represented by many systems. Now, you understand that a lot of people are always going to be unhappy with the government which forms after an election, but the majority should at least be satisfied given that they voted for it. But in the UK and other countries as well, they didn't really vote for it. It just sort of happened. In the UK, we have a government with a historically massive majority, which won with not much more than a third of the popular vote. Now, I am a Labour supporter, but if the majority did not want a Labour government, Labour should not have 100% of the political power. It should be shared among several parties that collectively represent at least a majority, preferably a good majority. This is why I prefer PR, because then that would happen. We might need a period of adjustment where political parties get used to needing to work together in coalition, where we've been used to for centuries, letting one party take all the power, but then we'd be in a stronger place and the public would be more broadly satisfied. Coalitions also have other advantages. You get fewer dodgy backroom deals because a single political leader cannot decide everything. Discussions on policy need to be shared amongst at least 2 parties so the discussions get exposed to sunlight a bit more often. In addition, AV should be easier to sell to the public. With my preferred option, you'd need more MPs realistically. Opponents will then attack the extra costs of running the government and Parliament, and maybe even the complexity of it because it would be a different system. Whereas with AV, there's no extra cost really. And from the public's point of view, they're still going in, the ballot paper looks the same, they're just putting numbers instead of a cross. You can have the same constituencies, you can have the same number of MPs. Even, as I say, the ballot papers, the only difference will be a slightly different instruction printed on them. The counting would work a little differently and might take a little bit longer, but that's it. It would mean that people can vote for their first choice of party or candidate without risking their worst choice winning power, which is what first past the post gives us. With first past the post, if you vote for what you believe is the best option without thinking tactically, you are actually helping to enable what you believe is the worst choice. First past the post requires you to think tactically if you want your vote to count. First past the post does not allow you to vote for moving the country forward as you believe it should, but in stopping it moving backwards. That's the best you can hope to achieve under first past the post, which is really depressing. So no wonder the public are deeply unhappy with our system. AV at the next election would allow a Green supporter, say, to vote Green first, but then Labour second, to register the vote they'd prefer, while still blocking Reform UK, the worst choice, at the same time. It doesn't work quite as well as PR, but it works a lot better than first past the post. But there are also advantages for political parties as well, at least the serious ones. One of the biggest problems with a first past the post system is vote splitting between groups who are similar, but not similar enough to just be the same party. This makes politicians and political groups attack those with whom they could work together almost as much as those who are opposed to everything they stand for, sometimes more. Whereas AV would reduce this friction. At the next election, Labour are not really worried that the Green Party are going to take loads of seats from them, not based on current polling anyway. But they are worried that the Greens will take enough votes to let Reform UK beat them in a first past the post system. But with AV, that needn't matter. In an AV system, second or even third preference votes are valuable. The idea is, after the first preference votes have been counted, if someone has over half the vote, they win. But if it was first past the post, they would have won anyway. If not, you eliminate the last place candidate. You take the ballots who had them as the first preference and redistribute them according to second preference votes. And you keep doing this until one candidate has over half the votes. If a ballot being redistributed has their second preference choice also eliminated, then their third preference is used. If even their third preference choice has been eliminated, then yeah, sure, that ballot goes in the bin. That voter didn't really think about it at all, but never mind. It means some votes can still be wasted, but far fewer. It also means that a political party does not suffer from having similar parties splitting their vote to allow the least preferred option through the middle. A system like this would be beneficial for political parties for two main reasons. First, vote splitting of their core vote is less likely to be disastrous. Second, because it's not an all or nothing system, political parties can focus more on core messages rather than trying to sling mud at literally everyone else, even if they're not that different to you. So here's how it could happen. Let us say that in 2027, some of Labour's moves now become evident to the public. They start gaining ground in the polls again. Things are looking up. OK, Labour will just press ahead as planned. No electoral reform. But let's say this doesn't happen, either because some of their plans fail or just because it turns out their communications is actually so bad that even though they are now delivering at this point, the public think it's too little on its own. So they are facing the prospect of a Reform UK government still. The polls have not significantly shifted. It needn't be certain or even likely that Reform UK would win. Let us just say that the risk is significant. Well, Labour could then go for AV as an emergency brake. They'd need a referendum, of course. There's a sort of a line in the manifesto, but it's really very ambiguous. And given that Starmer unambiguously stood by first past the post during the election campaign and since, there's no way they'd be able to just change the electoral system without a referendum now. They need a public mandate. But they could introduce one really quite quickly and see what happens. The public may well decide that changing the system would be a good move in a way they didn't over 10 years ago, even if Farage speaks out against it, despite approving in the past. And there's no guarantee that Farage would speak out against it. So what's the advantage to Labour here? Well, the problem with getting electoral reform is it always needs to be driven by the government, but the government forms governments by winning power under the current system, so they tend not to want to change it. Why change a system you won with? Well, if Labour have to face up to the fact they no longer know how to win with the current system, it would be like they're a losing party in power. The problem with the last Labour government, who did have a mandate for electoral reform, is they told themselves they knew how to win elections now, and that was it. They were just going to win every election. They just allowed themselves to think that. You would argue at the moment Labour can't think that right now, and if in 2027 the polls are not much better, they'd have to accept that they actually don't know how to win using the current system. AV wouldn't help Labour win power in the way they're used to it now, but it would help form a government which is Labour aligned. An AV system would allow a government that is pro-green energy, pro-workers' rights, pro-nationalised healthcare, whereas the alternative could be watching Reform UK dismantle all of those things while you're stuck on the opposition benches. I've always said that the biggest advantage to electoral reform for Labour is that it will help them achieve more. Too many in the party get stuck into this mindset that it's better to have 100% of the power for a few years, even if it means giving the Tories power for longer in between. It isn't, and it never was. It takes longer for Labour to build things than it does for the Tories to destroy. And the situation is much worse now because there are too many people at the top of politics peddling easy answers, which is part of the reason why the public will not even give Labour the time to rebuild anymore. In this more fragmented politics, it is actually better to share power than have all the power. Now, that might sound bizarre, but it's true. If we had a more representative system, we are more likely to get social democratic style government because that's what most people want. We know this from voting breakdowns each election. So we can see what voters are trying to vote for each election, but they don't get it. So Labour would be in power for much longer, realistically. They would just need to agree moves with others. They need to compromise, right? But it would also keep those others honest as well. The Lib Dems and the Greens, if they wanted power, would have to be more honest about what is and isn't achievable. Having political parties who are strong enough to win significant numbers of seats, but not get anywhere near power, they're a problem for good politics because they are highly motivated to offer idealised policies which never have to live in the real world, skewing public perceptions. If every major party could realistically win a portion of power, they then become motivated to get real with their policies because they'll be asked to deliver on them. People in Labour must stop thinking in terms of post-war politics. We're in post-truth politics now, and the rules have changed. So would you welcome an AV system if Labour wanted to introduce it for the next election? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel for more content. Click the bell notification icon so you know when the new videos are out. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.